The tutorial went pretty well, I thought. How did yours go?
Yeah, fine. He seemed to be pleased with what I found out. So what have you been researching for your essay?
Oh, mainly Maslow's theory and all that.
Oh, I haven't had a proper look at that yet. But from what I saw, I found his theories a bit old-fashioned. Mine is more focused around the two-factor theory.
That's by the American psychologist Hertzberg, right?
Uh-huh. I've been reading up on it over the last few weeks, and it's really interesting. I've made pages of notes and come up with loads of ideas. How come you haven't had a look? It's one of the compulsory topics we need to cover.
I know, but I've been so tied up with reading other stuff, and I just haven't got round to it yet. So, what's it about anyway? So, would you recommend it as a top read?
I wouldn't go that far, but I can tell you that it's worth reading for this essay. It sets out a lot of ideas really clearly, and it's really helped me to generate ideas and organize my first draft. Briefly, Herzberg created two categories. The first one is hygiene factors, and the second is motivating factors.
So, how is hygiene associated with motivation?
Well, actually, it's not really to do with keeping physically healthy, more like keeping psychologically healthy. Some of the examples he gives are pay, which obviously is one of the main reasons we work, the number of hours we spend in our workplace. He suggests that we can be demotivated by working long hours with poor reward, and the effect that working conditions have on the employee. He also mentions about differences in leadership styles and the relationship between colleagues in the working environment.
So far, that sounds pretty similar to Maslow's theory. What's the difference?
Well, there are a number of differences, but the main one is that he did not consider Maslow's more basic needs at the bottom of the pyramid to be relevant to modern life. The standard of living has risen a lot since the early 20th century.
Oh, I see. You mentioned motivating factors.
Yes, these are also important and include the need to experience things like a sense of achievement, challenge, and responsibility, and opportunities to gain promotion. Basically, he's saying that it is essential that we should have some control over our working environment, and that generally speaking, people who work in a team are more likely to succeed than those who don't.
Thanks, Susie. That's given me quite a lot to think about. I'll take a look at it over the weekend.
Today's lecture forms part of the 19th Century Britain module. Last week we took a look at the Jacobin tradition and the changing attitudes of the working class. Today we're going to explore the origins of one of the most significant phenomena in modern history, the Industrial Revolution. This can be traced back as far as Thomas Savy, who invented a rudimentary steam engine in 1698. Its primary purpose was pumping water out of mines. However, simple as it was, it had far-reaching implications on the technology and society of the time, proving to be the prototype for all other engines which followed, the engines which powered the Industrial Revolution. Engine performance only really showed a significant improvement with the discovery of smelting coal in 1709. Coal production doubled between 1750 and 1800. From this we can draw two conclusions. Firstly, engines had become powerful enough to delve much deeper into the ground, and secondly, it also suggests that there was a growing demand for the commodity due to extensive industrial growth. A pioneering spirit was emerging at this time, a time which signalled an extraordinary technological advancement by extraordinary people. One of the most well-known of these inventors was John Kay, John Kay, who invented the flying shuttle in 1733. This was the machine which would enable weavers to double their output. This was obviously a bonus for the newly established factories in the Midlands, which were growing in response to the rising demand for better quality cloth in the towns and cities. Naturally, many of the workers there saw it as a threat to their jobs, and therefore Kay's original prototype was destroyed, and his product wasn't introduced on the market until 1770. This, however, did not halt the march of progress. Other important textile machines were invented in the 1760s. The first one, known as the hand-operated spinning jenny, was a multiple spinning wheel, closely followed by Richard Arkwright's water-powered spinning frame. The latter was taken up by large factories and spread from the valleys of Derbyshire to Lancashire and on to Scotland. By 1799, steam-powered engines had really taken off. They were powering an ever-increasing number of machines in paper, flour and textile mills, all of which were driving the economy. It was at this time that a network of canals was being built. As you can imagine, once this infrastructure was put in place, it dramatically improved the speed and efficiency of the transportation of heavy goods such as coal and steel, both essential for the development of industry. It also meant that they could be transported a much greater distance. The upshot of this was that many places which were previously inaccessible were opened up to trade. At this point, I'd like to turn to another form of transportation, which was still in its infancy at the time, but destined to become one of the most important driving forces behind the Industrial Revolution.
So far, we've summed up some of the more evident reasons for our cultural diversity, and you'll almost certainly find a good few more as we work through the book list. Now, let's turn to a more panoramic approach to history. Our modern world is almost totally a product of what we have accomplished over the last 7,000 years. When the first Mesopotamian cities were established by the Sumerians, some researchers may go even further back to our first ancestors. However, this takes us back into prehistory when facts were yet to be recorded, and this is not covered in our course. It wasn't until the Greek historian Herodotus emerged in the 5th century BC that we had any clear evidence to work from. His findings will be covered in the Ancient History module, which will commence in the second term. So, how has ancient history shaped the world we live in? First of all, we need to take a journey back in time to focus on the topography. This is perhaps the most immediately obvious way that our world has changed. Thousands of years ago, Europe and North America were covered with huge swathes of forest, and human settlements were limited to isolated tribal communities who were often nomadic or lived in small villages. Wild animals such as bears and wolves roamed freely, and man hunted for food. It is not surprising, therefore, that during this time man had to fight for survival, which meant mortality was high. However, over the centuries, as the population expanded, the woodland was steadily cut down only to be replaced by ever-growing, in both size and number, human settlements. The results of this can be seen today in the form of megacities such as Tokyo, with a population of around 30 million, and there are a number of cities such as Shanghai, Mexico City, and New York, all boasting a population of over 15 million. And according to projections, these figures could rise dramatically. Mexico City, for example, was shown to have a population of 17.1 million in the year 2000. However, by 2015, the forecast shows that it will have risen to 18.2 million. That's an increase of over a million in a matter of 15 years. Cities such as Rio de Janeiro and Beijing follow the same pattern within the same time frame, with a small but significant increase of 1 to 2 million. There are others, however, such as Jakarta and Lagos, which appear to show an enormous increase. The figure for the latter one, Lagos, jumping from 13.4 million to a staggering 23.2 million, almost doubling the size of the population. So we have progressed over the course of 4,000 or 5,000 years from a handful of scattered tribes living off the land to a highly technologically advanced global society with a population of over 7 billion and still growing, and with it the impending and serious repercussions of environmental destruction and mass starvation. How and why did it happen? What will happen in the future? Of course, it's not our job to predict. We're historians. But needless to say, every fact which comes into being is history in the making, and that's what makes our subject so fascinating. Now let's move on to the development of political systems and their influence on our lives today.
These days, we know a lot about contaminated air, contaminated water, and so on. We know that smoke, chemical substances, and dust particles pollute our environment. We're not so familiar with the concept of pollution from noise, and especially with its psychological effects. Generally, the physical effects are not surprising. Partial or complete deafness can result from excessive noises. Airports, some factories, even some discos. But did you know that it's possible to kill a person with the right or wrong noise? Psychologists now believe that noise has a considerable effect on people's attitudes and behavior. Experiments have proved that in noisy situations, even temporary ones, people behave more irritably and less cooperatively. In more permanent noisy situations, many people cannot work hard, and they suffer from severe anxiety and instability, as well as other psychological problems. However, psychologists distinguish between sound and noise. Sound is measured physically in decibels. Noise cannot be measured in the same way because it refers to the psychological effect of sound, and its level of intensity depends on the situation. Thus, for passengers at an airport who expect to hear aeroplanes taking off and landing, there may be a lot of sound, but not much noise. That is, they're not bothered by the noise. By contrast, if you're at a concert and two people behind you are whispering, you feel they're talking noisily, even if there is not much sound. You notice the noise because it affects you psychologically. Both sound and noise can have negative effects, but what is important is if the person has control over the sound. People walking down the street with stereo earphones listening to music that they enjoy are receiving a lot of decibels of sound, but they're probably happy hearing sounds which they control. On the other hand, people in the street without stereo earphones must tolerate a lot of noise which they have no control over. It is noise pollution that we need to control in order to help people live more happily.
Man has always been interested in apes because they're at the same time so like him and so unlike him. In their basic anatomy or body structure, they are very similar, and for this reason they are both classified as primates, the highest form of animal. They also resemble each other in having hands and feet instead of claws like cats or hooves like horses. Likewise, neither has a tail. Both man and apes have large brains compared to their body size, and this helps again to distinguish them from other species of animals. But compared to the chimpanzee, for example, man's brain is 4 times as large. Like man, apes can use tools. For example, an ape may pick up a stick and put it in an ant's nest to make the ants come out. Similarly, apes have been known to make tools, for example, by breaking off branches to use as sticks. Man, however, is quite different. In fact, unique among animals because he can make a plan and then make a tool by following that plan. All human beings everywhere have a language, and there are thousands of different languages in the world. All these languages are equally complex, and they are very different from the cries of apes and other animals. Finally, we can use fire-making to differentiate men from apes. Man has possessed the secret of making fire for thousands of years. In contrast, neither apes nor any other animals possess this secret.